Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Rangers Reviews morning briefing on, Monday, the 29th of May, with me, Joshua, and Adam. Bit of an eclectic mix today, Adam. Neither of us are used to being in the hosting chair, but here we are. How are you doing, firstly? Nice day where you are?
Yeah, I'm doing good. It's a nice day here. I'm going to say nicer than yesterday, even though I was outside for about an hour and got burnt on my head and my legs, hence the hat now. So I'll be steering clear today. But yeah, it looks nice at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Very nice here as well. We're going to talk about the game at the weekend, kind of the season as a whole somewhat, look back on the first 6 months of Michael Beale's, or 7 months of Michael Beale's time at the club, and then, of course, as ever, take some questions as well. Just a quick reminder, though, that this podcast is brought to you by our good friends and partners at Seneca, the number one place for hair restoration, if that's what you're looking for. You know the drill by now, because Derek reminds you every single day, but all the relevant links for that are in the description. Right, Adam, let's talk about Rangers 3, St Mirren 0. A game, obviously, that didn't actually mean anything, but equally, I think, with a lot of games in the split, this split's kind of reminded me a bit of Steven Gerrard's first season, where, over those last 5 games, I think Morelos was suspended at that point, and it allowed them to try a few different things tactically, and by the end of it, Rangers had built up a little bit of confidence, which took them into next season. How do you look back on the game at the weekend, and then we'll get into the split and the kind of season as a whole, and where the club is really moving under Michael Beale?
Yeah, I was going to say that it is, I guess, quite reminiscent in the sense that that was probably the last time there was very little to play for in the split. I know last year obviously was kind of similar, but we still had Seville, etc., which obviously keeps things going. So it's probably the last time we've had, I think it was 6 games that time. Probably the last time that we've had a kind of chance to experiment with not no pressure, but limited pressure anyway. So that was quite interesting to see. Obviously, we know back then he trialled that Jack Davis Kamara 3, and he trialled moving the wingers in to the twin 10. So it'll be interesting to see what sticks, because like you said in your article, there was a couple of interesting things from the game at the weekend. There's obviously been a couple of other things that they have been trying, such as the box midfield and the split strikers, etc. So it'll be interesting to see what actually comes out into pre-season. It's nice to talk about these things based on 1 or 2 games, but I think we need to be getting to sort of October, November, and it being consistent before we can actually say, yes, this is the kind of catalyst for that. So the fullbacks piece is really interesting to me. I think as always, I think was it a tweet I did, or I think I tweeted a couple of weeks ago saying we're going to have to change the way that we use the fullbacks. I think Tavernier and Barisic, the way that they have played has been great. However, if we want to get, in my opinion, higher quality chances, we need to be using them more in a way that we used the weekend. I think bit deeper, bit flatter, sometimes a bit narrower, whether that's just with their passing or whether that's with their positioning. I think that's key. I think that will help us create a lot more opportunities. Ridvan is exactly the opposite of Barisic for me, which is strange, I guess, if you're recruiting to a model and a philosophy, but he is exactly the opposite in the sense that I think the only thing that he isn't good or very good at is crossing, whereas for Barisic, that's his huge strength. So that was interesting. And I think that new role that he had, if we want to call it that, or certainly that tweak for the game, was pretty evident with the first goal. I thought that was a brilliant pass. I don't want to go on about what certain fullbacks can't do versus other ones, but that to me showed the benefit of Ridvan. That sort of ball, that cutting inside and playing that ball is huge. It helps break down teams, as we've seen. So yeah, it's been interesting watching how things have progressed, obviously with the pressure off a little bit, and we'll wait and see how things go.
Yeah, pardon me. I think one of the interesting things is Beale has actually been quite, he's had quite a lot of variation, I think, to his setup. Probably one of the arguments, the criticisms of Steven Gerrard towards the time was that he was maybe did the same thing too often and there wasn't enough of variation, and probably the opposite criticism for Gio, who seemed to adapt too much to opponents in the league. And whereas I think Beale so far, and you've got to remember he's not had a pre-season and he's only signed 2 of his own players. I know that kind of argument doesn't really work because he's worked with a large number of these players before. But he's inherited a squad coming to the job in November, and we will go over this season as a whole and throughout the week on the video. You look back at a performance like the one Fashion Sakala gave at the weekend and the composure he demonstrated compared to some other moments at Hampden, and I think that has shown the probably the limitations of what Peel's had to work with in looking at the options he has up front, which takes us on to Fashion Sakala. Adam, the piece on the website is about him this morning. I believe it's 18 and goal contributions in 24 appearances, but only 19 starts in the league under Beale. 12 goals and 9 assists over the course of the season. Does he stay around? Because I think a few weeks ago after that, if you miss 2 big chances in an Old Firm game, you're going to do well to have a long-term future, because it's just the nature of it, isn't it? However, I guess you've also got to consider that you can't sell 20 players and bring in 20 players. And if you can get the best out of Fashion Sakala in a certain number of games, but maybe not rely on him in the big games, is he someone that you think will be part of what Michael Beale does next season?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because obviously it's football fandom and it's Rangers fans, and everything has to be black or white, and it can only be he's absolutely hopeless or he's absolutely fantastic. As always, the truth is in the middle, even more so for Sakala. I look at it quite simply, and to go back to that Gerrard era, we really struggled to get any player who could consistently score goals against the rest of the teams in the league outside of Celtic. We really struggled with it. Morelos would do a very, very good job at it, but there was only really one season where domestically you could have said he was outstanding in terms of a goal return, which was the sort of truncated COVID season. So having players like that, I think, are crucial. There's an argument there that we've got Čolak and Sakala. Do we need both of them? Will we are either of them to be a starter? I personally don't think so, and I think that's maybe the debate that we're going to have here. Should Fashion Sakala be first pick for Rangers? I would say not, particularly because of how erratic he is, but at the same time, I think it's fair to say he's had a very decent impact this season.
Yeah.
We have to remember as well, he's a free transfer, I would imagine, coming in on very, very low wages. For the return that he's given as an individual player, then fine. So for me, criticising Fashion Sakala for his performances in big games and in Europe kind of misses the point. It's more the fact that there are other players with a higher reputation who should have been playing in those games or should have been signed to play in those games and haven't for various reasons. So it kind of misses the point for me a little bit.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, comments coming in about big games, etc. I think Sakala's got the same amount of goals as Alfredo Morelos in Old Firm games in tougher times and in a lot less games. So obviously Morelos' European record is far outstrips it. But if we're talking about domestically, and I think the aim for the season coming up is scoring enough goals to win as a league, then for me, Fashion Sakala should be staying around. The other side of that is if you get a bit of money, and Josh, I know it's easy for us to say who's going to buy a player like that. Quite a lot of teams will buy a player like Fashion Sakala, and it won't be for £1 million. I would be stunned if people are interested in him. I think we're talking 3 million plus easy. So there's a debate there about whether the manager thinks, can I get rid of Sakala and bring in a Raskin and a Cantwell again with contracts expiring? Can I bring them in for the same amount of money, and will that improve the team more? Probably, yes. But yeah, so it's a very tricky one. For me, I think if finances were no issue and we were able to bring in everyone that we need to bring in, I'd still like to keep Fashion Sakala around to play every other game, come off the bench, etc., and see what he can offer, because I think his output speaks for himself.
Yeah.
Technically, yes, we know he's way off the standard to be the number one attacker for Rangers, but I think that's more how this season has gone with the others rather than the expectation that he would be.
Yeah, well, I think only Lundstram, Ben Davies and James Tavernier have played more minutes for Beale in the league than Fashion Sakala. And it's important. Obviously, he was nowhere to be seen at the start of the season. I think it took him 10 league games to get a start against St Mirren under Gio. and I think the reason that he's played so much is because, and the piece kind of details this, he's a hybrid player, kind of, because he can create from the right. He does that quite a lot, where in settled play he'll drift out wide, and think of the Cantwell goal in the Old Firm, where that allows space for him to cut the ball back into Lundstram because he attracts two players. So I think he's more creative for the right, and then I think it's something like 9 of his 11 goals come from the left, so he gives you that different option. Beale said on Saturday in his press conference after the game that he's been a hugely effective player for him, but he's kind of had to play as the focal point a little bit too much.
Yeah.
Aside from that Aberdeen game away from home, if you look at games like Hibs away, Motherwell away, the Motherwell away 4-1 game, obviously kind of meaningless now, but Rangers have had so many players, I think, who are good box to box, but make those games so difficult because they're not clinical, or away at Hearts and Hibs. And I don't think it's any coincidence that when Rangers have had those kind of performances away from home, even going back to, I know he had a bad game, Sakala, in the 2-0 game at Aberdeen, but he scored in the 3-2 win.
Yep.
He's not kind of come on late and scored against a certain level of opposition. He has scored in those relative big games that Rangers have kind of struggled in over the past few seasons. So I'm kind of with you. I don't think he's someone you build a team around, but equally I think if those kind of numbers aren't always cheap to come by, and if you can make that work outside of certain numbers of games, then maybe that's something that we'll look to. Let's move on to some of the comments, Adam. Kind of two main ones that I'm seeing so far, and the main one is John Souttar, Pete Lawrence saying Souttar was brilliant Saturday, can't remember one stray pass. His physicality is a handful for any striker, and adds that he drives into space well with the ball, which is great. Totally agree with that. I think that's tweeted that out yesterday. I think that's something that stood out of him so far. And world's greatest DJ saying Souttar strolled it on Saturday. It's taken a long time, but I think you're starting to see the best of John Souttar. Adam, kind of season closes at the wrong time for him. How do you think he's done so far? What do you think it says about the future of that position? Because Rangers, I think, will recruit another centre back. It's just whether that's on top of the three they have there, or whether one goes.
Yeah, he's done great. He has. I think I was guilty of this myself at the start of the season. You're kind of judging based on, not judging, but the couple of friendlies that he played, he didn't look great at all. And then obviously Livingston, he had a bit of a horror show. But as it transpires, I think he was injured at that point rather than being injured after it. So you have to be fair there. I guess there's always going to be a reliability issue. But I have been surprised at how well he's done. I guess, and I think I've said this to you before, Josh, with Ben Davies, we knew what we were going to get. I think on Heart and Hand, we did scouting shows about 2.5 years ago, and Ben Davies was a name that cropped up just before he went to Liverpool, I think. And the thing that popped up was technically very, very good, sort of can read the game well, but physically, aerial duels, etc., he's not the best. Therefore, there's a debate there. Do you bring in a player like that, or do you then sort of modify the team to make the most of that player and kind of play up to his strengths and get away from his weaknesses? Souttar looks to be much more all-round, as a much more sort of Scottish centre-half, if you like. I think my big issue, again, he's a free transfer, so you can't really complain too much at all, certainly not with the performances he's given recently. But even if it doesn't work out long-term, free transfer was worth the punt for me. Regardless of the injuries. But my big issue was, is he going to come in and be the Goldson replacement, which was the sort of intention last summer, I thought. And I thought that was a bit of a risk. I didn't think he was quite there. Playing together is quite interesting. It's obviously not his natural side, but he doesn't really seem phased by it. I think we'll bring in someone else as well, and I think that's quite healthy for competition. But I've been really impressed with him, and I think what I've said about Ben Davies in the past, he needs to show more of his technical ability on the ball in the way that Souttar is now, to sort of negate that lack of physicality. I thought he was okay on the ball, but his numbers weren't necessarily standing out in terms of driving forward, progressive passes, all that sort of stuff. It wasn't really at the level you'd want. So if he's not doing the things that he's good at to a really, really high level, then when the things that he's sort of less good at are being magnified in such big games, it kind of makes it a little bit difficult. So Souttar, I thought, was much better at that sort of driving forward piece than I've seen Davies, certainly in the last few months. So that was really pleasing to see. Like you said, the season's probably in at the wrong time. If you can get a couple of games for Scotland and go away and get a rest and come back ready to go in the summer, then that'll be ideal. But we'll just have to wait and see. Obviously, we don't want to pin our hopes on him given the injury history.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think Souttar's been really good. He steps in and he's powerful on the ball, and he's a different type of player to Davies. I think Davies has looked better when he's played alongside Goldson, someone who commands the back line and really leads it. And you could certainly see that with Souttar in the last few games away at Easter Road as well, quite notable. I still think that Davies kind of has had a bit of a hard time criticism-wise. I think you look back to even the Scottish Cup semi-final, I thought he was one of Rangers' best players in that day.
Yeah.
I do think he gives you a lot on the ball. I agree. I think he's had a couple of shaky moments, and that gets heightened so much because there always has to be, I think, at any certain time, one player who's going to attract more criticism than most. I think Michael Beale, I don't think he'll be completely wedded to the need for a left-footed centre-half, but I think he'll want to have one in his squad. We've seen him move to a back three in possession a lot. We've seen a lot of games where you've seen, I think, the benefit of his passing. The Dundee United at home and away, to me, are the two games that stand out. But I think to have Souttar in there, Ross Wilson said at the AGM that Rangers believed they could fix John Souttar's injury issues. I think the phrase he used was they went in eyes wide open, which is quite dramatic, quite movie-like. But if that's true, and if Souttar is now able to stay fit, then Rangers do have, I think, a brilliant centre-back on their hands. And it's no coincidence, Adam, that I think every press conference Michael Beale has done since John Souttar has played, he's went out his way. He's not really been asked about him because he has went out his way in the first couple of answers. And I think that shows... To praise him, and I think that shows just how excited he is about the prospect of working with him long term as well.
I think there's also I don't want to say irrational, but there's a fan opinion piece there where you sort of feel like there is a groundswell of support for John Souttar to make it and become that centre half. I don't know if it's a Scottish thing. I don't know if it's just the style of play, the physicality, the way that he speaks. All of that is great, but you feel like people are rooting for him a lot more than they ever have for Ben Davies, and I don't know how logically we kind of come to that opinion. Maybe it's just a personality thing. I think we've said before, sometimes fans just take players or don't take players to the heart, I guess, in this situation. I think with Davies, he has had some injury problems. He's had, I think, some off-field problems as well. Personality-wise, he's maybe quite, from the interviews, etc., he seems like a nice guy, quite shy and retiring. The leadership point that you mentioned there with Souttar sort of talking people through games, or marshalling, or even with Morelos going over to the bench and on Wednesday night against Hearts, Souttar kind of pulling him away, those type of things. Maybe Davies, it's not a natural for him. I don't think he'll ever be a dominant centre half in a partnership. So those are the kind of things that fans probably value as much as being on the park. So I think that maybe goes against Davies a little bit, but then also puts a kind of positive in Souttar's column too. Personally, it's the same as, for me, it's the same as maybe the Sakala conversation or the Hadji conversation with Davies. If you bring in a decent chunk of money, and Ben Davies will still get a decent chunk of money given he's left-footed, English, championship experience, played for Liverpool, etc. If you can do that and bring in a player who's cheaper and younger that is going to be, I don't know, more robust or more what the manager wants, etc., then why not? I don't think anybody should be untouchable at the minute, outside of maybe two or three.
Right, another name I'm going to put to you, and this is, I think, quietly went under the radar for the last kind of couple of months. John Lundstram, ever since that performance away it was a League Cup final, wasn't it? Really struggled, came out the side for a few weeks, had some better performances. Again, there's a risk of reading too much into things when the season is done. But I think, to be fair to Lundstram, you saw him recover some of the form that he demonstrated the season before. I don't think anyone's ever doubted the impact he can have on big games. Obviously, there's a certain European run that pays testament to that. But it was more about, well, what does he do week to week in games that aren't like that? But Maka there saying, having strolled the game and being given the captain's armband, I don't know, I didn't see that at the game, but Tab did, didn't he? Is Lundstram a big part of Beale's rebuild? He showed his versatility. Now, It's an interesting one for a number of reasons, Adam, one of which being Lundstram only has 1 year left on his current deal. So if he's staying around, you'd imagine that will be with an extension, because you're not going to hopefully let him run down his contract. We can talk about his style and what Beale's trying to do with him after, but just initially, do you think that next season Lundstram will be a big part of what Beale's doing?
It's a difficult one.
I'm gonna guess that I think he might, because you look at the leaders you're losing from that team. I just have a feeling that Lundstram, the versatility, again, seems a huge thing. The ability to not just play one position, not in a kind of binary, he's a right back or he's a centre back, but the ability to fulfil different roles, I think, is so important to Beale. And when you put in the leadership thing as well, I think that
it's a tricky one. That was quite interesting at the weekend when Tav went off and it went to Lundstram. I just assumed it would go to Ryan Jack, to be honest, I guess. Yeah. So that was quite interesting. I don't know. Again, you could read into that many ways. Is that going to be his last appearance and the manager wanted to give him that? Who knows? I think he seems less likely than others to go. And I think probably just for what you've mentioned there with age, value, maybe even wages as well for other teams coming in, I think he seems less likely to go. But he also seems, out of those players, and I'm kind of talking about maybe Kamara, Barisic, Hadji, the one of the four that you would think should be or will get significantly more game time than the others next year. Maybe there's a debate about Barisic there, but yeah, for me, I think it's a tricky one, because if we're bringing in Cifuentes, and that's the rumor, for me, he fills that starting slot, that sort of energy piece. If Lundstram is going to play as that number 8 with Raskin a little bit deeper as he has been doing, then Cifuentes fills that. If the rumours about, and I'm definitely not going to pronounce his name again, but the rumours about the Aston Villa central midfielder that was a loan at QPR, Tim Aragabom, whatever it is, he then fills that role as well. So I'm not sure on that one. Yeah. As a kind of player trading, this is what we want to do, this is what we're going to do moving forward, it would be a statement in that respect if we said, right, Lundstram has got 1 year left on his deal. We probably don't want to, we might want to keep him for this year, but we probably don't want to keep him around for 3-4 years. It's big boy summer, as we've said before. Do we get £1 million in for him, get the very, very high wages off the wage bill and go again? That's one side of it. On the other side, as you said, we're losing a lot of experience and a lot of players that have been here over the course. So is it maybe worth just taking the hit on this one and saying, whether we renew your contract or not, we want to keep you around for this year, and then we'll see what happens. So that's a bit of a garbled answer. I don't really think I've given you a real answer there. It depends on transfer business for me, and it depends on, I guess, what the player wants and what the manager sees for the next few years. But they've been very specific, I think, that they want to have a 2 or 3 year strategy here. Do I see John Lundstram being here and being a first pick in the next in 2 or 3 years' time? Probably not.
I think as well that when you play Nico Raskin, I mean, Lundstram, when he plays at the base of midfield, largely is, I think, to kind of allow Davies and Goldson to move forward a bit. And, you know, he's not that kind of player who's going to break lines constantly from the base of midfield. There was a few moments of with Raskin in the game on Saturday. We not only saw his ability to kind of break the game up, but then how technical a player he is just means that he can go through pressure so quickly from the base of midfield. I don't think that's Lundstram's strength, but common here there for me in saying, do him and Raskin get to develop in the same team? I think that Beale's always probably going to play Raskin and one other. And the reason is that he wants that balance behind the ball. He wants to go to a 3 at the back in the build-up. You know, it just, unless one of the fullbacks changes their positioning, and I think if you look all around the world at the moment, even Man City, you know, playing 4 centre-backs and one central defensive midfielder, you need that balance behind the ball and a good structure to prevent counter-attacks. But it's when you've got Kilmarnock at home, Dundee United at home, St Mirren at home, week upon week at Ibrox, do you think then in the midfield he can do enough to help break that down, or again, is it because Beale again has favoured him for a reason? And I think that hybrid positioning, what he does, the fact that he can go and play at centre back, the fact that he is so athletic, and he can play that kind of pressing role on the outside, again, maybe similar to the Sakala one, you're going to have to really replace that role in the squad if he were to go. So it's not a cut and dry answer, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. I think I completely agree about the sort of number 6 thing. I don't think that works at all for me. Gio did that quite a lot for him. I don't think he's comfortable enough on the ball, really. At a higher technical sense, I think it's fair to say Ryan Jack, Nico Raskin are probably better on the ball in terms of receiving it back to goal, even just sweeping out to the forwards, the fullback. Sorry, he feels like he needs an extra touch or two to do those things. So that sort of limits us doing a kind of cleaner build-up play. So from that point of view, no, for me it would be that energizer, if you like, that Michael Beale talks about, that sort of box to box number 8 who can go and disrupt. But as you've said, similar to I guess John Stones doing the role that he's doing at Man City, if he can come in and be that sort of hybrid extra centre back / sweeper almost in defensive midfield in certain games, then fine. But ultimately, I think it needs to be a deal that works for us if he is going to get a new contract, or if it's one of those things where he's being told maybe you're going to have less game time this year because we're going with Raskin, Cifuentes, whoever else. So you're going to have less game time than you've had. Are you happy with that? And if the answer is no, then maybe they'll try and move him on. So it's very much not cut and dried, but I can't say I would be devastated if he was still here next season.
Yeah, and I think to stress a point that the Beale stressed quite continuously, he doesn't think Rangers are that broken box to box when it comes to trying to break teams down. And I think Lundstram as well is a player who actually sometimes because he's not the player directly breaking lines or whatever,
yep.
People think he can be a bit of a passenger. But again, he's kind of, if you look at what I think has been a real improvement under Beale with how Rangers build play and control games, Lundstram kind of played in the majority of games there in a number of different roles. And I think the reason that he was such a popular member eventually under Gio, specifically in that Europa League, was because he could really take on tactical instructions. And that's probably something that's a bit underrated from the outside. Not that he's going into the games with hundreds of different instructions in his head, but maybe knowing when to drop and knowing when to create certain overloads. And he's obviously a player that managers trust as well. So no, I agree with you kind of on it. The contract situation will have to be managed increasingly. Obviously in football, you see player power seem to have quite a say in these type of things, but I think Lundstram would probably want to. I think he said before that he'd want to spend longer up here as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if he does.
I'm not sure there would be a. Obviously, if you win the league, then probably nobody really bothers. But I'm not sure there would be as huge and visceral fan reaction to John Lundstram staying for a season and saying his thank yous and goodbyes next summer, given it was a free transfer.
Yeah.
I don't think that would be a major issue. So maybe that's the sort of best approach for all. It will be interesting though, like we always say, it's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, isn't it? If he goes with that sort of deeper, flatter fullbacks that he's had in that last game there, then it sort of takes the shackles off the central midfield, doesn't it, a little bit? Because you're giving us probably similar to Man City, but obviously not at the same standard. If you're pulling them back a little bit more, then you can then let the midfield off the leash, and we can maybe just sit with Raskin and have Lundstram going and doing that, and not having to worry about covering Tav or covering Barisic, and maybe just free him up and sort of simplify his instructions and make him a bit more box to box. And that's the same for anybody that's playing in there. So all of that sort of stuff will be interesting, and it could mean that certain players that were maybe not thinking are as valuable could get a new lease of life, just depending on how we go with the tactics.
Yeah, just finally then, the type of striker, a few comments have kind of come in discussing that. What type of striker is Beale going to sign? I don't think that Rangers will go for, I don't think they need to kind of what Morelos was in 2020 in there to rotate the play and be a focal point. I think if you watch a lot of games, they're trying to do something different, with the weekend demonstrating that quite well in the way that they attack settled defences. I thought Sakala, incidentally, the first Sakala goal was a perfect example of how you use. People always say pace isn't effective against a low block. What it is, you just need to use it well. If you just chuck someone out and say run at them, that's not going to work. But if you can isolate yourself and create room, and as Sakala did, I thought really well for that first goal, then you are able to. Beale said previously, and I think you tweeted this out, Adam, that he wants strikers kind of involved in every phase of play. I think he wants a team that, again, is full of hybrid players, is dynamic, is able to do more than one job. I think we'll see forwards coming in, not just a forwards. But the profile would, I wouldn't be surprised if, obviously you need someone who's going to be a focal point, but I think you're going to see players as well who can fulfill that wide forward role that we've seen at the weekend.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's if we think about it in that way, then we had sort of Sakala and Matondo with a false nine in that game, but in the most of the games we've been that sort of split striker role. So people that can do both. I think I am. I'm not sure if anyone else is. I'm a little bit tired of bringing in players with half a skill set and players that can turn it on away to Dortmund, for example, but can't turn it on at home at St Mirren, and then vice versa. I think it's not too much to ask to have players who are all round and balanced. Certainly, if we've got a bit of money to spend. So for me, that needs to be the main thing. We need to bring in players who can suit the challenges that we've got, and unfortunately, 80 or 90% of that is breaking down defences. But like you said, we look at it and we say pace versus low blocks isn't going to work, but it needs to be pace and intelligence, and that's where I think sometimes Sakala and Matondo will let themselves down there. Movement needs to be on point to kind of stretch the defences and make the space, etc. It's not just all about we'll wait until the opposition come and attack us and then we can hit them on the break. We need to be moving them about and in the way that Celtic do, unfortunately, for the comparison. So for me, that needs to be key. It needs to be players with pace, players with hunger, players that are clinical, players with personality as well. That's a thing just now that we're focusing on. When you look at Todd Cantwell, we're not talking about people that are going to run through brick walls and are mentality monsters but aren't very good at football. We need to have players that back themselves and that have that personality. I think that's the key for me, and have the mentality to go and succeed. So modern forwards basically, and Morelos was probably a little bit of a throwback in that sense, not way back, but maybe to a kind of, I don't know, a Suarez type, where kind of come in and be a one-man wrecking ball, but we almost used him as a bit of a crutch sometimes, and we'll fire the ball up and let things happen. I think we need to maybe move away from that. Whether it's two number 9s that get played with a 10 behind, or whether it is a couple of wide forwards, inverted wingers, etc. I don't know. I just think we need to be ready for all scenarios. Personally, I think at the minute, if we're saying that we have Cholak, Sakala, Roof and Matondo, we can't, for varying reasons, rely on any of them to be a first pick, I think, for quality and or injury issues. So I think we're looking at least 3 forwards coming in, and ideally we want 2 of them to be more than capable of hitting 20 goals, for example, in a season. So be really, really interesting to see how he does this, because not only are you bringing in a player that you think is good enough, you're bringing in a player that has to fit your team, and then you're also bringing in a player who's going to have to dovetail and gel very, very quickly with 1 or 2 other brand new players as well. So that's a really, really interesting part for me as to where we go with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you to Adam for his time today, and thank you to everyone for watching and commenting. Remember, you can subscribe to the website at the moment. Today's long read is on all the numbers behind Fashion Sakala this season. Has his key pass map, shot map, lots of other details as well. So go and read that if you want to get a bit more of a rounded view about maybe some of his strengths and why Michael Beale's played him so much. The question obviously being, is he going to be part of things next season moving forwards? Derek will be back tomorrow. Until then, enjoy your bank holiday Monday and the sun. Thanks for joining us, and we'll speak to you.